the blistering summer of 1876, the Great Plains of Montana became the stage for a defining event in American history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, a figure of relentless ambition and steadfast confidence, guided his 7th Cavalry Regiment in the battle, intent on defeating the united forces of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes. Yet as the dust cleared on that fateful day, Custer's overconfidence led to disaster, reshaping the course of the American military forever. Lieutenant Colonel Custer decided to launch an immediate attack, fueled by an unrelenting resolve to prevent the enemy's escape. This daring undertaking reflected his firm commitment to control the battlefield rather than yield to circumstances. Custer's combat style was marked by an unshakable belief in the power of swift, multi-directional charges, consistently leading to the enemy's downfall. His military approach was clear yet determined. Seize the advantage with a surprise assault, then solidify this edge by ensnaring the enemy in a pincer maneuver. Unfortunately, this uncompromising victory at all costs mindset, to the detriment of Custer and his troops, failed to account for any outcome other than triumph. Had Custer been in Major Reno's position, his tactics might have succeeded. However, Reno was not inclined toward reckless boldness. His leadership avoided rash plunges into peril, unburdened by concerns for personal safety. In this respect, Custer proved an ineffective leader, expecting others to mirror his aggressive approach, an expectation starkly misaligned with reality. Custer's strategy, despite overwhelming odds, might have prevailed had Reno charged fearlessly into battle against the Hunkpapa warriors. Consequently, Reno faced significant blame from both the public and the military, who judged him harshly. Yet Reno was not Custer. He lacked the necessary audacity and relentless drive to advance without regard for consequences beyond victory. Custer placed Reno in a situation of immense pressure, a scenario Reno, and indeed most officers, were poorly equipped to handle, leading to hesitation and retreat rather than a decisive charge. Reno chose to dismount his men, forming a defensive line instead of storming through the encampment, thus surrendering any initiative and momentum that could have been vital against such odds. Even if Custer's plan defied conventional wisdom, once Reno halted the assault, pragmatism prevailed, making a Native American victory increasingly likely. Unlike General Crook, who had withdrawn 10 days earlier under the cover of his Crow auxiliaries, Lieutenant Colonel Custer either failed to grasp or stubbornly ignored the reality of his predicament. He was caught in a bold, multifaceted attack that, if successful, would have been celebrated as a masterstroke. However, once momentum faded, his fragmented forces became easy targets unable to recover. Notably, Major Benteen and Major Reno managed to preserve their positions, while Custer did not. They adapted to the dire circumstances, establishing a makeshift defensive stronghold on a hill, which demanded a coordinated assault to overrun. Throughout Western history, such defenses have often withstood Native American attacks until the attackers, fatigued, retreated, as happened on June 25 and 26, allowing Benteen and Reno to survive. Unfairly, Custer is often portrayed as an arrogant tyrant. While he undoubtedly possessed immense self-assurance, his greater fault was his inability to connect with fellow soldiers and officers. His charisma might have shown in the heat of battle, but his poor interpersonal skills and flawed judgment in daily army life estranged all but his superiors. To understand why Custer was selected to lead the 1876 campaign in the Northern Plains, we must consider what his superiors sought. Custer was a man of action, and they craved action. Though the stated goal of the campaign was to encircle the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne to force them onto reservations, the true aim was to defeat them in combat. Lieutenant Colonel Custer was the perfect choice for Generals Sherman, Sheridan, and Terry, who needed a commander unafraid to prevent the hostiles from escaping. The campaign strategy relied on attacking villages and destroying homes and possessions to wear down the Native Americans into submission. The generals chose Custer expecting victory, but when the campaign faltered, they scapegoated him. Moreover, the strategy wrongly assumed the warriors would fight only to protect their families and retreat. This proved false. Having forced General Crook to retreat, the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne were confident in defeating a smaller force. We can only speculate about Custer's motivations, but his desire for fame is evident. Why else would he defy orders by bringing a journalist along? His interaction with white man runs him a Crow Scout, further reveals his self-promotion. These people trouble the white settlers and the Crows. Today I'll teach them a lesson. I'll surpass you, Crows, and build a fort at the meeting of the Little and Bighorn so you can live in peace. For Custer, this would have cemented his legacy both literally and figuratively. While some claim Custer aspired to political office or the presidency, this seems unlikely, as I have argued elsewhere. More likely, he sought to emulate Buffalo Bill Cody, reenacting his heroic deeds. Regardless, Lieutenant Colonel Custer was undeniably egotistical, obsessed with enhancing his legend. When his luck ran out, his widow, Libby, worked to preserve that legacy. Libby Custer sustained his legend through historical inaccuracies, such as the claim that Custer's body was not mutilated, as noted by Tom Hatch in the Custer Companion. This is hard to believe, as the Native Americans likely did not even know he was present. Another erroneous theory, proposed by Maury Sandos in Crazy Horse, suggests Custer took a Cheyenne bride during the campaign. History often misleads due to its reliance on imperfect evidence. In Custer's case, the most accurate conclusion is that his luck simply ran dry. His limitations finally overtook him. He was neither a madman nor foolish. Custer's ego often led to irrational behavior, alienating those around him. His simplistic view of military success left no room for anything but victory, so when victory became unattainable, he could not save himself or his men. Custer's superiors knew of his ego, but also recognized his fearlessness and charisma in battle. Post-battle claims that Custer disobeyed orders exploited the vagueness of Terry's instructions, deflecting blame from those truly responsible, the ones who appointed him. General Sherman and Sheridan aimed to replicate the success of Mackenzie's attack on the Kiowa, Comanche, and Southern Cheyenne at Palo Duro Canyon in the Southern Plains. They selected a leader who would strike boldly and swiftly to prevent the Native Americans from escaping. Lieutenant Colonel Custer was their chosen commander. While Custer's flaws certainly contributed to his defeat, the survival of Major Benteen and Major Reno indicates other factors were at play. One post-battle claim that the Native Americans had superior weaponry was demonstrably false. Though some warriors had repeating rifles, their arsenal was diverse and makeshift. In contrast, the troopers carried modern Springfield carbines, single-shot rifles easily reloaded by ejecting the shell and inserting a new cartridge, a simple process. However, the true issue was the troopers' lack of practice with these rifles, especially in adjusting sights for varying distances. Initially firing from afar, evidence suggests that as the fighting closed in, they overshot their targets, their bullets passing harmlessly over the warriors' heads. Reports from the village, like those from Hunkpapa's Moving Robe and Pretty White Buffalo, describe bullets shattering teepee poles. Though these accounts stem from Reno's fight near the village, it's reasonable to assume this error persisted across the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Richard A. Fox's archaeological evidence supports this, aligning with Moving Robe and Pretty White Buffalo's observations. Military training at the time was woefully inadequate, contributing to the troopers' battlefield ineffectiveness. The annual allocation of practice rounds was so limited that many troopers likely had minimal, if any, experience firing a rifle, let alone in combat. In the chaos of battle, few would remember to adjust their sights, and weak leadership made it unlikely that clear orders to do so were issued. Yet this lack of training was not unique to the 7th Cavalry, but a systemic issue across the 19th century U.S. Army. Colonel Edward S. Godfrey, a colleague of Major Benteen, suggested that dirty or corroded cartridges required a knife for removal, as they wouldn't eject easily. However, evidence undermines this claim. Only 3 of every 80 cartridge cases found in Custer's sector showed scratch marks. At the Reno-Benteen defense site, only 7 of 257 did. This minimal evidence fails to explain Custer's defeat or support this theory. Custer's decision to forego Gatling guns has been cited as a factor in his loss, but it reflects his offensive strategy. He saw no value in Gatling guns as they were ineffective against a Native American village, a civilian settlement likely to be abandoned at the onset of conflict. He viewed them as cumbersome, slowing his speed, which was critical for surprising the enemy. In the 1874 Battle of Adobe Walls, Gatling guns had saved Kit Carson's forces from destruction. However, Custer had no intention of fighting defensively, and wouldn't have known how to use them effectively, even if he had. General Nelson A. Miles noted he wasn't surprised Custer declined them, stating, "They are worthless for Indian fighting." The troops, exhausted from a forced overnight march, were indeed weary. But this was a shared condition, not exclusive to Custer's men. Within Custer's 2 detachments, one group rallied heroically, while the other fell into utter chaos. This contrast may explain the conflicting Native American accounts, which some have used to question their reliability. The troops' fatigue contributed to their defeat, but it was a minor factor, one that better leadership and strategy could have overcome. After Custer's 5 troops were destroyed, the Native Americans who returned to fight the remaining 7 troops were repelled, suggesting the force was still formidable. General Nelson A. Miles observed, "No commanding commander can win a battle if 7/12 of his command are still outside the fight when his rifle shots are heard." Had all forces attacked as one, Custer might have prevailed despite the odds, leveraging their numbers and scattering the warriors, who would struggle to protect their families. Custer's strategy typically involved charging the enemy, ideally from multiple angles, a tactic he likely employed despite his later apparent recklessness. Major Reno's charge lost steam. Custer was delayed in finding a river crossing to align with Reno's attack, and Major Benteen's force was underutilized. Benteen lacked clear instructions on when and where to engage, merely told to move south and southwest and attack any Indians encountered. Colonel Edward S. Godfrey, attached to Benteen's command but absent during the battle, later blamed Reno's retreat from the timber, based on an 1886 conversation with Chief Gall. Benteen believed that had Reno held firm, the Native Americans would have withdrawn when faced with simultaneous attacks from Reno and Custer. Personally, the worst-case scenario would have been more troops surviving if led cohesively in defense. The best-case scenario would have been momentum carrying the day. Sadly, Reno's hesitation doomed Custer's forces, who were ill-suited for defensive tactics. Clearly, Custer's primary focus was preventing the Native Americans from escaping. This concern was shared by the U.S. Army, whose multi-pronged strategy was designed to block Indian withdrawal. Notably, the Army deliberately targeted civilian encampments, believing warriors would prioritize family safety over fighting. This tactic had succeeded in the Red River War in the Southern Plains, ending in victory about 18 months earlier. While General Terry commanded Gibbon's forces alongside his own, he effectively delegated his forces' leadership to Custer. Meanwhile, General Crook's force operated separately, potentially a critical flaw in the campaign.